I guess I have a few questions based strictly off what President Trump said. First, to have a meaningful deal, is 10 days enough time?
Well, I think it depends on how you define meaningful. If you look at the deal that the Trump administration fashioned around Gaza, that was a meaningful deal, but it was short on details. And so that could be what President Trump has in mind. If he's thinking of a meaningful deal like the deal that the Obama administration, the JCPOA, did with Iran many years ago, that was a document over 1,000 pages long, many, many, months, years in the making. That kind of thing is not obviously possible. The Iranians are used to negotiating, haggling over every detail, and the pace and the pressure with which the Trump administration and the president in particular want to see actions and deals made. These two things are very much at odds with one another, and certainly a 10-day time frame could allow for a deal in principle, but certainly won't allow for a detailed scope.
Meghan, it's good to see you, and I'm glad you're back with us on this day of days. I'm seeing 2003 mentioned in stories all over the terminal and all over the internet today. The biggest military buildup since the invasion that you helped to prepare, the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Have we ever seen this much hardware assembled in one place without it being used?
Sure, and I should say that I was there. I went to Kuwait before the invasion of Kuwait, but at the time I was reasonably junior, but certainly I was there for it and part of it. This, as you pointed out, this is the largest military buildup of American force and firepower that the world has seen since 2003. And I think it really raises questions about what kind of action could the Trump administration be preparing. Certainly, this wouldn't be the first time that the Trump administration, or President Trump, I should say, would be using force in Iran. But the nature of this buildup and the lack of clarity around exactly what the objective would be in this particular use of force, I think is adding to some of the insecurity around the moment, is adding to the global jitters. Also, the questions around Iran's retaliation. I think in the past, what we've seen, whether it was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in the first Trump administration or the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities last summer, those were very specific and targeted military actions. An Iranian response was quite contained. I think the possibility is real that we'd be looking at something that was larger, more uncertain, and less contained. Of course, as President Trump made clear today, there's still the possibility of a deal on the table, and it could continue to be the case that this show of military force is to increase the pressure on the Iranians, because no doubt there's still a large gap between the U.S. and Iran on what each side would like to see in a deal.
Well, and so certainly there is some flexing happening, Meghan, of America's military might. But to your point on potential retaliation from Iran, what military might does Iran have right now, knowing that we did do damage back in June with the first strike? What is their capability to respond? Where do you think Iran could target?
Sure, Kayleigh, thanks for that question. First of all, your viewers should have no doubt that the U.S. is militarily superior in every dimension that is meaningful in a long-term sense here. Where Iran still does have capabilities, it still has missile capabilities. And that is one of the issues that the Trump administration would like to see, and the Israelis and others would like to see be part of a deal, which hasn't been the case in the past deal that has been solely related to nuclear issues. So it still has some missile capabilities, and that would likely be the focus of any initial American strike. What is causing concern is that Iran's remaining capabilities could still have an impact on America's Gulf friends and partners. So the region, I think, feels on edge and very vulnerable. There's also Iran, as your viewers will know, staged a military exercise in the Straits of Hormuz. That is, of course, also making people quite nervous, because that's, of course, where 20% of the world's daily oil consumption passes through that strait. Now, when we've seen the military action that I referred to earlier unfold in the Gulf over the last months and even years, but particularly in the last year, all that military operation didn't really raise the price of oil because it didn't disrupt supplies. Something that brought conflict into the Gulf and particularly into the Straits of Hormuz would certainly disrupt supplies. And the markets are telling us that they really do distinguish between military force and military force that disrupts oil supplies.
Meghan, we talked about your experience in 2003. 4 years later, you are credited with being one of the original advocates of the surge strategy. And I'm wondering what your advice would be to the administration when it comes to the day after conversation. What are they mapping out for scenarios, and what should they be prepared for?
Well, I think this gets to the point I made earlier about what is the objective that the Trump administration would be seeking. There's several objectives that they may embrace, and it's not entirely clear to someone who's not involved in the internal discussions. Certainly one objective could feasibly be regime change, and that makes it akin to the American action in 2003 that got rid of Saddam Hussein from Iraq. Now, in the last year, President Trump has demonstrated the kind of an allergy to that kind of intervention because of the really open-endedness of that. And certainly that is one of the scenarios that I think deserves very significant attention, is what would happen if one of two things happened. What would happen if U.S. military force was targeting the regime, the supreme leader, elements of the IRGC that brought about a regime collapse? Now, certainly my experience in Iraq and that of many, many other Americans and our coalition allies was that collapse takes a very, very long time to rebuild, to reconstitute, and opens up a security vacuum that can have a lot of unanticipated consequences. So I find it hard to manage that a collapse of the regime wouldn't require a much more robust American engagement in Iran for potentially a much longer period, something way beyond, I think, the American people are interested in right now. Whether the Trump administration has had a relationship with some members of the IRGC that could take over and something that would be more seamless and less disruptive is only probably known to the president and his closest advisors.
Well, so Meghan, it sounds like you're saying in our final minute here that there is a risk that we accidentally tumble into another, if not forever war, forever presence.
I think there is a risk. I wouldn't say it is the central risk right now. My guess is if we look at President Trump's his propensity to use military force, it has always been quite targeted for a specific objective without the intention to get involved over the longer term. And so my near-term expectation would be, first, a real push for a deal. I don't take the 10-day window to be definitive. Certainly there's been flexibility on timing on a lot of these conflicts. So look at Ukraine, which was going to be solved, in the hours running up to the inauguration. So I think the desire for a deal is going to be real. It depends if the Iranians can show more flexibility. Secondly, if there is military force, I think it'll go after the ballistic missiles. I think the idea that the Trump administration would want to topple the regime without any real prospect for stabilizing the country is something that I think is a risk, but not the largest risk that we are exposed to right now.